Hi,
Oh,
Jared. Good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, you bet. Some people may recognize you from a couple of the roundtables you did early on, a couple years ago, and people may recognize you from the podcast you've been doing, but I'd appreciate if you would introduce yourself for those who might not know who you are.
Okay, yeah. I'm I'm Jared Snyder. I was born and raised in the church in Virginia. I had great grandparents that met workers around 1912 in Washington State. My great grandfather actually wrote about Jack Carroll, George Walker, and William Irvine in his diary. Uh,
Wow.
so he heard all three of those men preach. And I was in the work for 21 years, mostly in Virginia, a little bit in Pennsylvania and North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And I left over the course of a few months before I made it official, but in 2023.
Hmm.
And I'm married and living
Hmm.
in Missouri now.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been nice to get to know you a little bit through CCF over those years, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience or about the things that I might not even be aware of that happened in your experience. I know you share a bit about that on your podcast, but maybe we could talk a bit about whatever you'd like to share about your journey. That'd be great.
Yeah, that it's hard to know where to start, of course,
Hmm.
but I would say, I was based on, stories that I've heard at this point from many sources. I would say I had a very fortunate growing up experience within the church. I felt
Hmm.
surrounded by loving family, and I always gave credit to workers and the church for making that family what it was. Uh, I've kind of changed that now. Now I just give my family credit for being loving people more than any
Hmm.
doctrine or ministry. But overall, I would say it was easy as a child for me to believe that God was a loving heavenly Father because that's what I felt surrounded by. Like I had a loving father
Hmm.
and mother, and over the course of my years in the work, I think any idea of God became very confused, and I think I was clinging to past memories and past ideas of who God was, and it just felt like there was just radio silence between
Hmm.
me and God. So that's a very rough overview of the way things went.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was never a good professing kid. I don't think I can remember having a radio in my room and like when I was like 13, 14, and I would fall asleep listening to the radio and feel bad that I like reading and praying wasn't the last thing that I did at the end of every single day. It was always easy for me to feel like I'd just strayed off course. When I got to college, I feel like a lot of things just came to a head all at once in a way that I didn't know how to sort out. It's just normal stuff at that age. The pressure of making life decisions is one thing that anybody would have, but also this pressure about the need of the harvest field, and which I desperately did not want to go in the work. I still wonder what exactly happened in my years in college, but I got into using drugs a lot, and partly I thought I was just having fun, but I think maybe this possibility that I would get called in the work, and I was terrified that I would get called in the work, but I was also terrified to say no if I felt called in the work. That was a very spiritually dangerous thing to do, to tell God no. So I think I was trying to squeeze as much life as I could into what I might have left before the call
I see.
came, because life was basically over once I was in the work, is what it felt like to me.
Yeah.
As much as I would try to hear what other people would say that this is the best and you have the best of it, and there's deeper peace by doing what God wants you to do. I mean, I would speak that way. And now I feel more like I was saying the thing that I wanted to be true and really needed to be true in order for my life to make any sense at all. For like 2023 was when I finally gave myself permission because I'm hearing survivors say, this is what my experience has really been. And I gave myself permission to say, oh, what has my experience really been? Instead of telling the encouraging version that will keep everyone encouraged to press on in God's true way and finish faithful. Um,
Mhm.
and it was once I started doing that, it was like, oh, this has been this has sucked the entire way through.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of what to tell and what not to tell because there's
Mhm.
so much. I mean, even from the time that I started in the work, maybe I could just like that experience I've of being called in the work and offering for the work. There was this pressure on me to get life right, and I was spiraling into more and more drug use and harder drugs, and I was flunking out of college,
Mhm.
and then in Sunday morning meetings, I was hearing about the great need of the harvest field, and actually, a lady that was in that meeting went in the work while I was in college, and then married a brother worker a short time later. So at
Mhm.
first I felt this relief, like, okay, someone's out there meeting the need. And I was like, oh no, now the need's even greater than it was.
Mhm.
And in Virginia, that happened. There were three or four couples like that in my growing up
Mhm.
years that brother and a sister worker got married. So yeah, I was just feeling more and more miserable, but also terrified that God would call me in the work. Again, I still try to sort out what exactly happened, but I felt like this epiphany one night, and I was on ecstasy. I was on, you
Mhm.
know, I was drinking and smoking weed, and I was on ecstasy. But I always told myself like I had already done those things. I knew what it felt like to be high as a kite on all those things. It felt different, but I was being crushed under this question of like, how do I get out from under this misery? And I thought, I just need to come clean to everyone. I was renting an apartment from an elder in the area, and I was like, I just need to go tell him this is the life I've been living while I'm living in your place, and I need to go to mom and dad and say I'm flunking out of college, and I've got, and that started to feel like a relief. Like I'll just be honest about all this instead of living this double life. And then
Mhm.
it was like this thought in my head, go in the work. And
Mhm.
I my first reaction was no, 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 no. And then this fear came like, what if God never speaks to you again? And it scared me out. I was like, I'll go then. Like, and there was this peace that came over me. It just felt like everything was resolved in an instant. Like why I couldn't decide what career I wanted. Oh, well, God wants me to do this. And I don't have to keep going to college. And it doesn't matter that I'm flunking out. And I'll get cleaned up. I'll get off drugs. Like it'll be a great rehab. And it was actually. Um, so when people talk about God's grace and like never hearing about it, like while they were in the church, I mean, that experience for me was a God's grace experience. It just felt like I had a clean slate in an instant. Um, and where my faith was at the time, that's how I was interpreting all of that was God just gave me a new start at life. And I felt like I had an amazing story to tell and that, I was doing everything I could to screw up my life. And now here I am as a worker with a new start. and God did this for
Mhm.
me. Um, so that was just the attitude I was going in with, and almost immediately I just came into an absolutely toxic situation among the workers, and the overseer. And if anyone has listened to that podcast about Sam McCracken, um, they'll hear that story. But he ran the preps like a madman, like a tyrant, and it was obvious. Like
Mhm.
he just yelled at people like it was nothing. But there was a group of workers that like could do no wrong around him. So there was just this weird in and out, um, like others could do
Mhm.
nothing right, and the whole dynamic was just confusing and miserable for me. So when I started, I was on the outs side. I couldn't do anything right. So that just kind of continued through the years. Like, when I was starting out in the work, it was fresh in my mind that I had, when I had my life to myself, I had messed it up. So it's like there was nowhere else to go. It felt like this is where
Mhm.
God called me. This is where I have to be for the rest of my life. It's not safe to be anywhere else, or I'll just go back to screwing my life up. So
Mhm.
I I wish I could put into words just like the level of effort that I put into loving Sam McCracken. It was like he's the most unlovable man I've ever seen. And but that's what Jesus would want me to do, is love him and love the unlovable, because that's what God has done for me. And it worked, like, in a way, like, in the sense that I won Sam's confidence eventually, and I became one of the workers that could do no wrong, which wasn't actually healthy either, and I was aware of that. But um it felt like a great spiritual victory on my part. That's how I always interpreted it. But really, like, the toxicity never went away. I just got relief from being on the bad end of it. And
Yeah.
there was little I could do. I mean, I wish obviously that I'd done more, but there was little I could do to protect other people that were still on the receiving end. Um,
Mhm.
Over the years, I had a terrible nervous breakdown. I think that was a combination of just the lifestyle and celibacy and just being strung out in all these different ways, and the loneliness. And so I just collapsed internally, and
Yeah.
and I interpreted all that spiritually, like God,
Mhm.
um like God leaving me, and God, um and to be honest, I mean, yeah, that nervous breakdown changed my faith in a way that had, it's never returned to the way it was.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
but I stayed in the work, for however many 12, 13 years after that. I had no idea what else to do. It was my entire worldview, so it didn't work to do anything else. Now when I look back, it was like my body and my brain were telling me, like, I can't do this. So I recovered just enough to be able to go again. Yeah, I just wasn't listening to my body and my
Mhm.
brain. One
Mhm.
thing I haven't talked about is, like, before that nervous breakdown, is that Marlon Hallbachen, who's a brother worker that many people would know probably, is like, he had died shortly before I had that nervous breakdown. And when you're in a toxic situation, it's like you're looking for someone to be the savior, and Marlon felt like the savior, like bringing a a more positive vibe to our staff, and then all of a sudden he was dead. The confusion was, why, when I was trying my hardest to do everything I was supposed to do, did I completely come apart at the seams. Like, and maybe this is another thing I haven't really talked about before, but like even just Marlon dying in those years in Virginia, over 20 years, there were just a lot of what felt like early deaths. Just like a young mother, a father and a son in a plane crash, a friend that had been my age, that I had known growing up. He had stopped coming to meetings for a long time, but he dying of a drug overdose. But he was only maybe a couple months younger than me. I mean, just people's children, seeing, our friends' children dying. And often I was speaking in those funerals. Now, when I think about it, there was just so much grief just mounting, that unprocessed grief just mounting and mounting and mounting. And I wouldn't even want to know what I spoke at those funerals when I think back about it now. But yeah, just all these things that pile on, and I don't know, things that make you question life, and then you just cram it into this worldview of the church. That's very
Mm-hmm.
limited, um,
Mm-hmm.
and just so often like the tools didn't exist within the church to deal with life as it actually was, is what I experienced over and over
Right.
again. So that's part of it, and then so I recover from that nervous breakdown, and then I'm put with Leslie White, who's being given his
Right.
last chance in the work, and told nothing about why
Yeah.
he's being sent to Virginia. And shortly after I refused to keep working with him, then the allegation came out that led to him being told to step aside. That would have been 2012. So a little over, like say in 2023, I'm realizing over the next 11 years, that narrative about Leslie from within the work and from the overseers, the narrative about him became that he was taken out of the work by a false accusation.
Mm.
But it was known, it was known that he was manic and hard to control. And that's just how I think of it now. As far as the overseers who made that decision, it wasn't the accusations against him. It was that he was hard to control on their part
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
caused them to kind of stand firm in keeping him out.
Right.
Again, I recovered from my Leslie White experience, and I ended up with a brother worker, Clinton Goff, for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was in his 90s, I think, early 90s, a former overseer. Yeah, he was the kind of grouch that made Sam look jovial. Yeah, and as far as my relationship with Sam, that's maybe just listen to that podcast. It's very complex. But Clinton
Mm-hmm.
Goff, like, I still have a soft spot for Sam. Like I said, not that he deserves it, but because I worked so hard to have it. But people like
Right.
Leslie White or Clinton Goff, no. Like, Clinton was nothing but a miserable grouch who disrupted the peace in every home that we came into. It was just a grief. It was something you survived to have him around. And I remember thinking, is this what you become when you spend your life in the most important work, the best way anyone could spend their life, and this is the kind of person you become when you get
Right.
old. I saw it over
Mm-hmm.
and over again. And I was like, is this what my remaining years in the work have to offer me? Is to help the next old grouch wait on him hand and foot until he finally dies? And that's what it started to look like, is helping the next one die until I'm the old
Yeah.
grouch dying.
Yeah. Right.
um, so,
Yeah.
and I was well on my way to becoming that.
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
the longer I stayed in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but so, again, I survived my time with Clinton, And then, like I've said, I got into what I called my beard years, where I don't even know, like that was something that never got talked about, but it was just one of those rules that wasn't a rule, that workers don't have beards. And I don't know what switch got flipped in me, but I was at home for Christmas for a week and didn't shave. And then it was time to leave, and I was looking in the mirror and I was like, I'm not shaving, I'm growing a beard. And it's like,
Mhm.
I hope someone does tell me not to, you know, at
Mhm.
first, that experience of having a beard as a brother worker when no one else did, I think that revealed like it brought up the question, like, am I in a cult? Or like I'm among the Pharisees because they're sensitive to this nitpicky little thing. And what we learned later is like, okay, we've got people that are super sensitive about whether a brother worker has a beard or not, the way a woman looks, whether someone's divorced and remarried. But when you're talking about children being molested, they're like, well, we all have a human nature. Hoity
Right.
doity. How still, like, how did they so successfully just mute people's normal human responses to those kind of things and make everyone super sensitive to these rules that don't amount to anything?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it still just blows my mind.
Yeah. It's
Um,
baffling.
but there was something weird about just having a beard
Mhm.
and feeling the discomfort all around me, the unspoken discomfort. Like I said, it was a rare
Mhm.
person that would come out and say, wag their finger and say, you shouldn't have that. But
Yeah.
most people just quietly felt uncomfortable and probably were praying for me to get a revelation about it, at night.
Mhm.
And eventually I caved to that. Like I just wore out. It was like, okay, I just won't have a beard. It
Mhm.
feels easier to not live in the midst of that discomfort all the time. In those beard years, I was with Robert Flippo, who was one of the brother workers who was dismissed from work in 2023. One of three. Yeah, so he had just been dismissed from the work,
Mhm.
and I was still, in the work talking about convention preps with Jim Holt, the overseer, and he's wanting to, like, Robert had done the buying for conventions, and he's still wanting to use Robert to do the buying, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
Stuff like that. I mean, just tip of the iceberg. Maybe I could just back up and say one of my early years in the work um, was when Ira Hobbs was put out of the work, and he had
Okay.
family. He had family in Virginia, so he came to live in Virginia, and I was in that field, and we were told nothing about why
Mhm.
he was out of the work. He was
Mhm.
he was in a Sunday morning meeting with young children, and
Mhm.
those families were told. His own family wasn't told why he was put out. And of course, Haji Holgerson. I feel like that's a name I always need to say. Is just Haji Holgerson is a child molester who was in Virginia, coming to meetings and conventions unrestricted for decades. It was known what he had done, but it was kept quiet. I felt complicit, like in it and enabling of him because I never tried to find out the specifics about him. It it was kind of whispered about, like right on the edge of like, I think Haji did something. I heard Haji
Mhm.
did something like years ago. And but that was part of your righteousness is to not go digging into someone's past. Um,
Mhm.
and so it was generally known that Haji was a creep. That caused me to realize this weird culture that I was immersed in that watered down people's responses to the sexual abuse of children and
Mhm.
just muted our reactions and left us incapable. of mustering a
Mhm.
substantial response,
Mhm.
like the only thing we knew how to do is the same thing we'd always done.
Right.
So that
Right.
always had to be the answer to every problem.
Mhm.
I was thinking about that when I was walking earlier today. Like in the years that I knew Ray Hoffman, it's not like he did absolutely nothing. I mean, and I don't know much, but he put
Mhm.
Ira Hobbs out of the work. He stood
Mhm.
firm on putting Leslie White out of the work, but it's like the problems were this big, and
Mhm.
like Ray did this much, and
Mhm.
so he was willing to address this much, and like, but anything that was bigger, then the problem had to be minimized. And say when you're a worker and you're strung out, you're trying to spread yourself so thin among all these people. Like every problem has to be solved within 5 minutes. You just spiritually gaslight someone into patting them on the head like everything's actually okay. There's no problem too great for the Lord or whatever. And just so,
Right.
you've told me what your problems are, and I've told you to let God handle it, and now everything's okay, and I can go to the next house. And it's not like there's zero acknowledgement, but it's like up to a point. Like we'll acknowledge a
Mm.
problem and deal with a problem as long as it fits inside this narrow lane. But to acknowledge it's actually huge and systemic, and it's going to be very messy and complex to fix it, and we don't know how it's all going to fall out. Yeah, no one's willing to address things on that scale. So I guess I mentioned Haji Holgerson just in 2023. That was the light bulb situation for me. Like this represents everything that everyone's talking about, everything that's been wrong for years. Every single year I've been in the work, I have prepared conventions in Virginia so that Haji Holgerson could attend, who's just looking for an opportunity to groom and get access to children. And all this while that I've been dealing with my own crap, again, this savior complex, it's like if I'm just willing to suffer, maybe I can absorb the suffering for someone else. Like, okay, I can be
Mm.
resigned to my life being a, a huge pile of crap as long as I can feel like I'm making it better for someone else. And so to realize my life has been miserable, and I've been maintaining a system that's been making other people's lives miserable too, in the worst kind of way, and worse than what I've been going through. That light bulb comes on and it never turns off.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Was it gradual at that point? Was the undoing of it feeling gradual,
um,
or was it very quick?
yeah, it's interesting. I feel like the process of deconstruction had started many times over the years, and then I would cut that process short and put it on the shelf and just press on in the true way. And what was actually cutting short a process that needed to be followed through on, though, to me that was like a spiritual victory. Like I didn't let that get the best of me, and
Right.
I came through it with a
Yeah.
good spirit, and I still am to this day, just pressing on in this
Mhm.
Jesus one true ministry on the earth today.
Mhm.
So in 2023, it was like, yeah, it's like all those processes got finished very quickly, just one after the
Okay.
other. So it all happened so fast. Like the difference between April and May in 2023 is just, light years. And
Mhm.
so it's actually hard to put together. I mean, the difference over the course of a week in where I would be at, and even my exit letter in November 2023, I don't even recognize the person who wrote that letter at this point, it feels like. One part of that letter that I would definitely keep is just the notion about exclusivity. It just this notion that the church, the fellowship of workers and friends, is the final destination of the spiritual journey of any honest heart, and that there's never a reason to leave. Whatever I said, like people that leave are not part of the falling away. If you just lightly cast them aside as a part of the falling away, it's like, listen to these stories. Is that the advice you would give? Is to stay in this church? Well, maybe even like CCF is a good example. Like for me, because I I got on CCF somewhere in July of 2023, and then I was in an apartment in Virginia in like August and September, I think. And I was just on CCF all day, every day. And, for me, CCF was huge right then. Like it probably saved my sanity to be able to process with other people that were going through the same thing. And, eventually I left,
Mhm.
and it just didn't feel like the place to be anymore for me. But I will always have a positive association with CCF because of that. And if I had stayed, I would probably hate it at this point. Like it was right for that time, and it was extremely helpful until it wasn't. And it there was no one compelling me not to leave the one true social network. And I feel like, that the Facebook groups are similar in that it's like we're here for this to be helpful. And if you're finding help somewhere, if this ceases to be helpful, then no one's like, we're not trying to keep our numbers up. To me, that's one thing that doesn't exist in the church. There's no such thing as leaving on good terms. It's always, if they left meetings, then they never really had it, or they're somehow at fault. There's something wrong with them. No
Mhm.
matter no matter what their story is, there's something wrong with them. And to me, that's just one simple thing that would make the church just immeasurably healthier, is if they could accept that maybe some people will journey into this church and then journey back out, and it doesn't make them wrong. And maybe some people will spend their life in it. Maybe some people will encounter it for a little while and it'll help them for a little while, and then they'll go on with their journey. Um,
Mhm.
and that
Mhm.
just doesn't exist.
Would you mind, and you certainly don't have to take this question, but would you mind talking about what it feels like to make that decision to leave and how to piece your life together from that point? But I know a lot of people, that's the part that hinders them from making any changes.
I think for me, I was fueled by adrenaline and frustration and it was like a bomb about to go off. Well, I guess I realized all the things I'd been through the years, and like maybe just all this unprocessed grief, all this unprocessed trauma. And I realized I can't heal within this. I have to go outside of this to heal, because it's just to stay is just keeping the wound open. And yeah, I knew I was walking into a lot of uncertainty. For some reason, all the fear fell away. It was like I don't even know who or what God is anymore, because nothing about my life makes sense anymore. But
Mhm.
I just thought, I'm done being afraid of God. And I'm done being afraid of going to hell for all
Mhm.
eternity, for getting something wrong. It's like, if God is there, he sees that I'm completely perplexed and not trying to get
Mhm.
away with anything. He sees every effort I've made to get it right. And he, she, they, it. I just thought I can't be afraid anymore. I refuse to believe in that kind of God. I think I wrote that in one of my Substack posts, that you get this one short life, one short confusing life, where we're preposterously vulnerable to bad information, and just and heaven and hell are always hanging in the balance on every tiny little decision you make. I just can't
Mhm.
believe in a God that set it up that way. And I think actually in one of those roundtables we did, the first one,
Mhm.
I said something like it was about difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And it was like sometimes we're afraid to even have a difficult conversation if it's about a subject that feels scary, like territory we shouldn't even be venturing into. I said something like the fear is that you'll be holding on to something essential and then let it go.
Mhm.
And at the time, I like the way I was picturing it, I said, if you do that, you're going to land in God's hands. Now I just confused myself talking about it, but um, I I took those first few steps out, and it was like just realizing, that it wasn't all coming apart. Like the devil wasn't getting a hold of me, and I'm getting right back onto drugs, or that I had absolutely no self-control. And I'm not sure if I'm even answering your question or not at this point. I,
No, you are.
okay.
Because so much of that is what our fear is that
Mm,
if we leave the structure we're so used to, that our entire life is going to fall apart.
mm,
And like you're saying, you took those couple steps out, realizing that your life wasn't absolutely falling into what you
yeah,
feared it would fall
yeah.
into. Yeah.
And actually part of that for me was, after I was in that apartment, I decided to drive around the country. My dad had a
Hmm.
car I could use. That was part of my what I call just signing off with God. It was like it's like, okay, I'm not going to read or pray anymore. I'm certainly not going to meetings anymore. And it's like, you know where to find me. It's like you're holding all the cards, so you're going to have to speak up if you want me to do something different, but I'm not trying to get away with anything. I'm just going to be out here trying to figure it out, and off I go. And because I remember, prior to that, I had this saying of like, can we just let God be as big as he is?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I should acknowledge, like, I'm speaking in past tense because I don't even know where I'm at faith wise right now. I would say agnostic. Um,
Hmm.
I, I just think trying to define it guarantees that you'll get it wrong. Like,
Hmm.
that's just the way I'm thinking now. But,
Hmm.
like, let God be as big as he is. And I just thought, well, the more you think about even the idea of who God is, if he's the creator and all knowing, then you're interacting with him every moment of every day. I mean, your every breath is so to just exist is to live in harmony with God, if you want to call it that.
Hmm.
So that it was in that with that kind of attitude that I was signing off, like, I'm not going to do this praying thing anymore. The way I'm living is my prayer, you know. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I remember just being on a highway out, probably in Colorado somewhere, and just thinking like, I can't do this alone. Like I can't heal alone. I just felt it very strongly. But I thought like, I'm not just going to go try to marry the first person that looks at me, but I just felt that very strongly. And I had connected with Jen through CCF initially, and by the time I was in Seattle, it got to the point of calling her on the phone, and that conversation was like 5.5 hours long. And then the next one was 4, and the next one was 6 or something like that. Yeah, it just felt like life handed me like things are actually going to work out for a change.
Yeah.
And the people around us were just comfortable with it. And when we would hang out with people after we were married, they would say, "This doesn't feel like the first time we've hung out." And like the first weeks of us living together, I said, "It doesn't feel like we just got married. It feels like we've been married for a while already." I'm not telling that to say, and that was God showing me whatever, or some other spiritual explanation. All I'm saying is things worked out when
Yeah.
I left the church and even left like my religious practice that I had known all my life. It's not like my life is such a great success that I'm ready to really brag about it, But I
Mhm.
just felt like I had rejoined the human race, even just not being a worker anymore. One of the first things I started doing for work was door dashing,
Mhm.
and I'm like grinding through these, these $3 orders where I drive half an hour to deliver something for $3, and I'm like,
Mhm.
this is what it's like for people out here. That's another weird thing about being a worker is, I had nothing as far as money for my future that you would normally have if you've worked until into your mid 40s. But as a worker, you always had cash on you because you always had spending money, and like sometimes an embarrassing amount. And so I remember the first time that we ate out as a family of four, and I was like, oh, that was this many days, this many hours I worked door dashing, and it's gone just like in one meal. And I like the numbers meant something to me again because I had
Mhm.
had to work for it. I don't want to accuse every worker of being out of touch with what money is worth, but I remember like when I started, I did have that sensitivity to
Mhm.
because I had been working up until I went, but you lose that after 20 years. I just kind of lost like this represents somebody's time, and
Mhm.
I felt like I valued it in a different way. There were things that I could only realize from the outside and look back and say that actually wasn't healthy, but I was in it so long that it had become normal. And maybe just the money thing is just a small example. What else?
I appreciate how you go from a childhood and looking back on that, looking back on your time in the church, looking back on your call into the work and what that might look like now. I think what you talk about in your time in the work is such a good brief example of what you've shared in more detail on the podcast, and I'll link those in the article, and I would encourage people to go and listen to them because it's really important stuff that you're talking about. But I also really appreciate how you share a little bit about your life since making the decision to leave, because I really appreciate how you talk about being in touch with your humanity again. I think that's a really interesting way to put it. And I think it's an important thing for us all to think about, especially when we think about people leaving the work.
Maybe I could just say, one of the hardest parts of leaving and maybe why people stay is it's hard to be on the wrong side of the narratives we've all heard all our life. The very thing I've done to other people got done to me, where, you'd say they left and you make a judgment about them, having no idea why they left. And, I realized I'm the bad guy in the story now. And just realizing how quickly that can happen. And there's been no conversation, no communication. All they see is it looks like Jared has a bad spirit, or it looks like Jared's full of himself, like he's not staying in his place. He's not letting the overseers handle this when they're the ones being led by the Holy Spirit here. Um, or yeah, Jared just wants place, and that's why he's and like or just not knowing because there's been no conversation. Just
Mhm.
I don't know what people are thinking or believing about me. And the thing is, it's not even like I mean, I had spent a life in the work. Maybe I did have no clue what I was doing or saying. I was my life had not equipped me to have a clue at that point. But I just thought it's got to be something other than this because look at the results we're getting. Maybe that's the hardest thing because I said this recently in a conversation. You realize, okay, I'm in my mid 40s and I have nothing for retirement. I'm starting a career or trying to figure out what career to start. But it's not really the money that you feel burnt that I feel burned about. It's those relationships. It's like I invested hours. of my life in those relationships, and the overseers successfully came between me and these people that I thought I
Mhm.
was friends with. It felt like I finally stood up to the bullies at the high school and got my ass kicked
Mhm.
in it
Mhm.
just in embarrassing fashion. There was that kind of bitter pill to swallow because it felt like everything I tried to do didn't amount to anything, and everything's just going on the same. I feel like for people that are still in, especially the ones that I have known, like maybe I have no voice with them anymore, and maybe I am beyond angry and frustrated at the stance they've taken, but when it comes right down to it, I mean, I can say that I love them. I don't hate them. I just think they're wrong. I just think they're dead wrong. Even if it feels like my voice isn't going to be heard, I don't know what else to do but
Mhm.
but call it the way I'm seeing it now. um
Do you feel like some distance? It's been a couple years since 2023, of course. Do you feel like some distance and some healing has given you the space that you need to now have a podcast and write about it? Is it less, potentially less tender in a way that you can call it like you see it, like you say?
definitely, yeah. And maybe that's a good point. Like when someone first leaves, be prepared to be angry for a very long time. Give yourself space to be angry indefinitely. Because when you realize what it actually was, like the way you lived and what you thought it was, and then you have one realization after another that of ways that you were abused and taken advantage of, it makes you very angry. And
Mhm.
it does it doesn't mean you'll go to your grave being an angry, bitter, bad person. It's taken time to even get my head on straight enough and to get calmed down enough to just start saying the things out loud. Um,
Mhm. Well, I appreciate you being willing to say it out loud today because I'll mention again, like your podcasts are incredibly well done, incredibly well thought out. But I appreciate you taking the time to even come in this format and to share a little bit, just to give a little bit of an idea of what your perspective and what your experience has been, because it's really valid.
yeah,
Yeah.
it always feels like the tip of the iceberg when
Hmm.
you start talking about stuff. I'm already thinking about what I all the things I forgot to say. but
Well, you can save
but
it for a podcast, and then we'll
yeah,
listen to you there. I'll continue to listen to your podcast, and
yeah.
I'll, like I said, I'll link it in the article so people can hop on over to your Substack and listen to your podcast. It's very well worth a listen. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Whitney. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. Have a great day.
All right. You too. Yeah.